The purpose of today's training is to revisit and identify the key components necessary to achieve student engagement in our classes. There was a district-wide training happening across Fort Bend ISD so that we could align our campus expectations with district goals, and to be both consistent and effective in our teaching and our planning. And research shows a significant correlation between high levels of engagement and improved attendance and achievement. Together, we will explore how do we improve student engagement and learning. You know those days in your classrooms where you had those students on the edge of their seat. We will examine how our lesson planning and lesson cycles connected, and we'll evaluate how our campus expectations aligned with district expectations for teaching cycles and planning. We've all heard the jar analogy. The jar represents the amount of time that each of us have to teach. No matter how long you've been teaching, no matter how many years you've taught that particular subject, we all have the same amount of time. The big rocks, these are the activities that matter most. They have the most profound consequences that results from completion or non-completion. Students may participate in choir, concert band, marching band, or orchestra. They may have innate abilities to engage in rudimentary forms of music using basic rhythms. Students in art must learn to see in order to draw, well, have a basic understanding of the elements of art. The pebbles, these are the little things that may add up to something significant at some point down the line, like a greeting at the door or in the hallway, a smile, an apology, a pat on the back, encouragement, tutorials, concern, attendance to extracurricular activities outside your subject, which is unconditional positive regard, liking your students regardless of the work in your class. The sand represents the non-urgent, least prioritized things that fill our days and our work lives, answering emails, returning phone calls, etc. So filling our jar with sand first prevents us from fitting the large rocks that are meaningful to our teaching life and work. Today our focus is on the big rocks of student engagement, and to dig a little deeper, our purpose is to help identify these big rocks, working collaboratively toward integrating key ideas, and understand that the lesson cycle should drive our decisions in our lesson planning. So, to focus on the big rocks, sand must be attended to, or it can become the big rock. So what are the two big rocks? The two big rocks are the key. So, to focus on the big rocks, sand must be attended to, or it can become the big rock. So what are the two big rocks? The two big rocks are the key components of the lesson cycle. Remember, the big rocks are what matter most and have the most severe consequences that result from completion or non-completion. In other words, what am I responsible for teaching? The determination is made by both the state and district through the TEKS. The curriculum is found in PCG, and it is the what, and it is the non-negotiable, or the tight in the loose and tight model. How is the best way to teach it? How the curriculum is taught is the loose in the tight and loose model. Thank goodness each of you teachers has the discretion to determine the most effective instructional strategies. Thank goodness teachers each have the responsibility for identifying and using the most effective and appropriate strategies for each concept and skill to be mastered. This is critical because student engagement and learning is tied to methodologies used. So what is the difference? What are key lesson components? Lesson cycle and lesson planning are connected yet different. Our focus is the lesson cycle and what should occur during a lesson. Let's review the key components of the lesson cycle. Think of your own lesson plans in each of the Let's review the key components of the lesson cycle. Think of your own lesson plans in each of the components. Although the terms may vary, they will fall into broad categories. And remember that our focus is both campus and district-wide is to develop common understandings and expectations. Some of you may be familiar with the Madeline Hunter model, the Fundamental Five, the 5E. Whatever you are familiar with, just think about this terminology and think about how it fits into what you already do. So the very first term we're going to talk about is engage. Engagement. This is where we capture the student's interest and we make connections to previous learning. It's also called motivation or the anticipatory set. You frame the learning, which increases comprehension by focusing student learning in a context. You're setting the purpose. It's why we need to know and learn something. Also called the anticipatory set, which is also called the opening hook, like a movie trailer where you are anxious to see more, and that's where you leave your students anxious for more. Warm-ups are a preparatory activity. For instance, I walked into a theater class over at Clemens in Paul Schaefer's class, and they were doing some warm-ups. But in all classes, and particularly in sports, you also do warm-ups, like in dance class and in music. You might do some vocal activities or play your instrument. There's also sponge activities that soak up spare time. When I was in another theater class at Fort Settlement, Wes Copeland did a bus activity where the kids pretended as though they were sitting on a bus, and it was soaking up the spare time at the end of the class. Do now is a request for a response to write or draw or act now. And then activate prior knowledge is connecting the old information that they already know to something new that you're providing for them. To engage. Next, there are the learning experiences themselves, and this is the teaching and the experiences that develop a student's understanding of the objectives for the day. And the models are actually the structures that we use to present that information. For instance, a mini lesson can be a 5 to 15-minute activity that fills up small chunks of time at the end of the class, like the sponge activity. A demo would be showing while explaining by the use of examples. Whole or small group instruction is the teacher-led instruction to the whole class without differentiation versus the teacher working with small groups of 2 to 4 on a specific object. It allows work with students, it reinforces the concepts taught, and you're checking for understanding because the students can ask questions without being intimidated and not having to ask in front of the whole class. There's also shared reading and writing, where a book or poem can be read repeatedly to build the student confidence. And then there's interactive reading aloud, where teachers read aloud and students can interact. And then inquiry is questioning to solve problems and to resolve doubt. Next there is the structured practice, and this is actually the opportunity to demonstrate understanding and a transition from guided practice to partner to group to independent practice. Now, there are several ways to do this. You can have workstations, which is an area within the classroom where students work alone or interact with one another using instructional materials to explore whatever the concepts are. There can be guided math and reading. There can be modeling. You can model the objectives. And there are different workshop models, which is the framework or the outline of components to be used in any context. In other words, there's 9 Marzano strategies, and they include identifying similarities and differences. For instance, a Venn diagram or charts to compare and classify. Number 2 is summarizing and note-taking, where you can summarize, ask questions, substitute and delete information and put it into words. You can reinforce effort and provide recognition, which is to show a connection between effort and achievement, share stories of people who have succeeded, personalized recognition, pause, prompt, and praise. There's homework and practice, which extends the learning outside the classroom. There's non-linguistic representations, where you incorporate words and images or use physical models and movement. There's cooperative learning, which is a successful teaching strategy in which small teams, each with students of different levels of ability, use a variety of learning activities. There is setting objectives and providing feedback, and then generating and testing a hypothesis. And then last of all, cues, questions, and advanced organizers, which help students activate prior knowledge, deepen understanding of learning content. Then there's the check for understanding, and this is the process or the activity that the teacher uses to verify that the students are learning while it is being taught. There's several different ways to check for understanding. The formative assessment is what provides information needed to adjust teaching and learning while it's still happening. The process serves as a practice for the student and a check for understanding during the learning process. With facts, the summative assessment evaluates student learning at the end of an instructional activity by comparing it against some standard or benchmark. But there can be questioning and there can be running records, which allows an assessment of a student's reading performance as he or she reads from a benchmark book. Closure is the end of class activity to summarize the learning, provide context, and build anticipation for the next lesson. And the ways to provide some activities include an exit ticket, which is a technique used to show what students are thinking and what they learned at the end. Hot seat questioning, where students will be asked to sit in the hot seat and answer questions. Or a writing summary, which restates only the main points of a text or lecture without giving details. Japanese teachers highly value the last 5 minutes of class time for summarizing, sharing, and reflecting. You can change the pace of your class, have students reflect on the day's learning. You can encourage and focus writing with a prompt such as the muddiest point and the clearest point. You can ask questions like, what was the most confusing thing about the work we did today? Or what was the most clear? Consider writing responses to student journal entries to carry on a conversation with your students. Throughout the lesson cycle, there are actions that both students and teachers should do. Here on this slide are a few of them listed. You can add more to the list that would make for a strong lesson cycle. Throughout the lesson cycle, there are actions that both students and teachers should do. Here on this slide are a few of them listed. You can add more to the list that would make for a strong lesson cycle. So as Stephen Covey says here, the key is not to prioritize what's on your schedule, but to schedule your priorities. So as we plan priorities, we must continue to dig deeper and to schedule our priorities in both written form and then to execute the plan in effective classroom instruction. Here listed are the district's expectations. That the teacher's lesson plan shall include objectives from the district's written curriculum. There should be measurable objectives that are displayed and explained to the students daily so that students are aware of what they're able to do after the lesson is complete. Tasks should be sequenced into a hierarchy of learning skills. Monitoring and assessing student mastery of the objectives, and provide correctives and enrichment based upon student diagnosis. All of this is intended to have students be successful and have the lesson plan follow the lesson cycle across Fort Bend ISD. So what is your
Questions may arise as to why now. We're in a halftime adjustment. Some of you may have planned out your whole year, but the halftime football analogy is the perfect time to re-examine your current instructional practices, because even winning teams with great coaches make adjustments, and winning lesson cycles ensure active student engagement and student success. So what is your big rock when it comes to the lesson cycle? What are your greatest challenges with your students and the strategies that you are using to meet those challenges? How do you plan your instruction, and what are the most important considerations during your planning? How do you engage students? Unfortunately, the video clips that we had to show can't be shown in this particular presentation mode, but we'll work on that and have some to show in future webinars. Thank you for your patience. Thomas Carlyle once wrote that let each become all that he was created capable of being. What a great definition of success. And I think you'll agree that our teaching life challenges us many times every day to develop ourselves to the fullest. Success is ours when we reach for the highest that is within us, when we give the best we have. Success is in the doing, not in the getting. Life asks that we do the best with each experience, and people who care about other people want to share lessons that life has taught us. I ask that you accept today's talk in the spirit that it was given. I believe that it's always good to remember what is good in life and in the people that you deal with. And today's talk is about tapping into those inner resources that you have but may not be using, about becoming the best person and teacher, a reflective practitioner, and by doing so you can be enjoying your teaching life to the fullest. While reading Life's Greatest Lessons, it reported that by the age of 18, we have each been put down more than 100,000 times. When we do get put down, it begins at an early age and continues into adulthood. News media continues to inform us as to what is wrong with the world and its people. However, today's focus is on the other side of humanity, and in the belief that the majority of people are loving and caring. In too many instances, we each sell ourselves short. We have good qualities that we are unaware of. We have inner resources that we have not yet discovered, and we have opportunities that we've never dreamed of. And finding and seeing the good in ourselves and others can be one of the greatest joys. So think about the reason or the person that had you choose to be a teacher, because they saw good in you. My teachers started when I was a tap dancer at the age of 5 or 6, tap dancing to Hickory Dickory Dock on the stage of the Sugarland Auditorium. Then I played the flutophone with Mr. Hart, the flute and clarinet with Mr. Gary. I had art with a 5th grade teacher that taught me how to draw a tree. And then I had Miss White and Miss Crochet, both in middle school and high school, that had me develop and love and appreciate art and learn myself to fully express myself. Remember, too, the ancient proverb tells us, I hear and I forget, I see and I remember, I do and I understand. So think about how very important it is that when you teach what you teach, with the love and the passion that you have for your subject, that you engage your students effectively and have them get just as excited about learning as you are about teaching. Thank you for being here in our webinar. I'm Dr. Joan Marsh, and I'm glad you joined me.